Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Gitesh Dubal, and I'm the CEO and founder at Nova Spark Ventures. I have a career of about 20 years in healthcare. A lot of that has been focused in rare diseases. And so today I'm very excited to talk to you all a little bit about clinical trials and how they are designed, the purpose they serve, and how they help. So I'd like to really thank the KCNT1 Epilepsy Foundation for the opportunity to speak about this important topic and something that I'm frankly pretty passionate about as well. So, to tell you a little bit more about clinical trials and to get into the details, what is a clinical trial? A clinical trial is a carefully designed research study to help understand more about a therapy, about a medical device, and how it works in a particular disorder. So these are designed to advance the science and to help understand, well, how exactly would this work? Does it give the intended outcome? Is it safe? Is it effective? Does it work in different subpopulations within a clinical disorder? And how does it impact the patients? And does it give the desired output as far as desired outcomes that the patients would want to have? So that's a little bit about the clinical trial and what that is. There are four different phases to a clinical trial. The first one, phase one, is specifically designed to understand, is it safe, right? As the Hippocratic oath goes for physicians, first do no harm, right? So the first thing you want to look at for any therapy is to see if it is safe for the patient. So it's usually done in a smaller group of volunteers to understand, how does this work, and does it cause any concerns? That's the first thing that you'd want established. Once that hurdle is overcome, and you go into phase two. In phase two, you're looking at a little bit more at safety, and you continue to look at that given the importance of it. But you also start looking at how effective is that therapy, right? So you might have different doses that you might look at, or you might try to look at, as you're monitoring the safety, does this therapy really work well in this particular disorder? And is it giving the intended outcomes that you're looking for? The third phase, phase three, is building upon phase two, and it usually takes a larger group of patients, and then it starts looking at consistency in the outcomes, right? So if it worked for some patients, does it work for all of them? Does it work consistently? If you had a large sample, does it give the same results for everyone, or are we seeing variance and differences in how well or not well it works for different patients? So I think it's really fascinating how over the years, organizations like the FDA have put this in place to make sure that the therapies are appropriately tested, and we're checking them to see that they're safe and they're efficacious before they're approved by the FDA. So that phase three looks at a larger data set and looks for consistency in performance, and we're always continuing to look at safety through that process as well. And after that is when the approval comes in typically, and I'll talk a little bit about that approval process separately as well. But then once the therapy is approved, it's called phase four evaluation, where you're continually looking at how that therapy is performed, how that drug or medical device is performing out in the market, and to continue to gather long-term safety and effectiveness data. So sometimes if a drug works for a short period of time, but that wears off over, let's say, 3 to 4 years, you want to be continually vigilant to monitor and see how that drug's performance continues or doesn't continue over time. So there's a lot of different things that are in place, and that's kind of the overall structure of clinical trials as determined by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. So why are clinical trials important for rare diseases? And I think clinical trials are overall important across the board, but they're especially important in rare diseases. There are more than 10,000 different rare diseases identified, yet only about 700 of these 10,000 rare disorders have a therapy for them. So that's, less than 10%, about 7% of disorders have a therapy for it. There are also other rare disorders that haven't been fully categorized and understood yet. So, there's a need for science and need for innovation in this space to ensure that we have viable therapies that are safe and effective for all rare disorders, right? And so that's why you constantly see clinical trials coming up and how, with what you talk about at KCNT1 Epilepsy Foundation, hope is on the horizon. This is one way in which hope is on the horizon is by having these clinical trials that are going on to understand further about how the disease, the disorder, is science, the science behind it, and the science behind how these therapies are actually, would impact and improve outcomes for patients. And then, these ongoing studies continue to improve the science and the understanding so that we can have even better therapies for patients across the board. So that's why I think it's really important for rare diseases. They're also typically less of an investment that's made in rare diseases because the patient population is smaller by definition. So it's super important, and FDA has also created different pathways to create a faster approval process for certain rare diseases. And I think that's a really a good way to get new therapies that are effective out, that are tested and validated and understood, and get them out to patients in need. So how are clinical trials designed and structured? And to talk a little bit more about that, there are several things to make sure that the studies are designed in a robust way from a scientific and statistical perspective. So not to go into too much details, but around these two things, there's concepts that are brought in like randomization. So you would make sure that if there's, two different treatment group, let's say one's at dose A and the second one is at dose B, which is twice the dose of dose A, to make sure that both of those sample size have the equal number of distribution around age, around gender, around the severity of a disorder, so that you can compare apples to apples, right? And make sure that you can make the right assumptions coming out of it. The other part that you might have heard about is called placebo. So you would have a group that receives the drug and the other group that receives something that looks very similar to it, but it is a placebo, meaning it has no impact on the patient in any way. But it just shows you that, okay, if someone got it and someone didn't get it, how well did it work? Or was there a safety signal that we got with the product that raises some concerns? And you can pick it up in a more effective and a more confident way from a numbers perspective. And then the last thing, which I think is really, really important, is blinding who is getting what dose and blinding who's on a placebo versus who's not. So this blinding, typically when it's double blinded, means that also the physician does not have visibility to whether they're giving a placebo or an actual product, or giving dose A or dose B, so that any biases one way or the other that the physician or the people looking at the data would have are eliminated, and you're looking at just the pure, data and the pure information behind it that's unadulterated and unaltered in any way. So these are some of the things that have been put in place, to make sure. The one other thing that I'd call out, that in certain cases it has happened in the past, where if a disease is so rare and there is a therapy that we know is already working, let's say off label, to do a placebo-controlled study would mean that it's an ethical concern, where you are knowingly withholding a therapy that works from a patient. So the FDA has created guidelines around that as well, that in those cases you wouldn't do a placebo study and make sure that you're not preventing a therapy that's known to work well and depriving a patient of that. So that's a little bit about kind of some of the elements of a clinical trial. I think the last thing I would talk about here a little bit is what are some of the regulatory aspects around the clinical trial design. And so in order to start a clinical trial, not just anyone can start it, right? There's a process around that, and it's called filing an IND, and that's filing an investigational new drug. And this is an application that you would submit to the FDA. They would review it. And before you even start it, that has to be reviewed and approved by the FDA. Once you get the study results done, then you have to package them, organize them, and submit them to the FDA under a new drug application, or a biologics license application. And then that data is then reviewed and scrutinized by the FDA, and they look through it and make sure that it would meet the standards of public safety and patient safety and give the desired results and meet the claims that are being made by the drug manufacturer. So with that, there's a lot of challenges in rare disease trials, right? So it's typically a smaller patient population. So there's less patients who have these disorders by definition, again, because that's rare disorders. So, they may be spread out geographically. Each physician who treats might only have one or two or three patients with this disorder. So that, the clinical trial has to be designed in a certain way, and you have to really reach out and overcome these hurdles because you might have physicians across the nation that have these rare to find patients that you have to seek out and get their approval and get them informed and enrolled in the clinical trial. Also, many times there's limited funding around this, so you have to figure out, okay, how do you do this in a cost-effective way and recruit patients for the trials. So I think, participating in a clinical trial is a personal decision, but I think it's a fantastic way to help with advancing the science around a particular disorder, right? If there isn't any therapy, if there aren't any therapies in the market for this for a given disorder, it becomes even more important. And if there are therapies that are suboptimal, meaning they work, but they're not really great. How do we participate to help not just the current patients, but the ones in the future? And how do we kind of live our motto of hope is on the horizon and really help take action to bring that to life? So I think, participating in these clinical trials will help in many ways in understanding the science around the disorder, around how different therapies work. Are they working to the level that the science of it would expect it to be, or is it working even better or worse? I mean, these are things that will help answer the questions and demystify what's out there around a given disorder. So, advancing the understanding of science would help in improving outcomes, and this would be a great way to participate. So I think, doing this would and participating in clinical trials would only help in getting further along in the journey of finding a place, a world where KCNT1 epilepsy doesn't exist, right? Wouldn't that be great if we can get to that point? And the journey to that begins with clinical trials. The journey to that begins with understanding the science, diving deeper into how different therapies work and impact. And the more we know about it, the more we can do something about this. Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate this opportunity to speak with you and to share a little bit of my thoughts. And I wish you all the very best. And thanks again for this opportunity to share my knowledge. Take care.